This video is to show how I edited this image I took on last week's walkabout around Winterton. I've got the image open in Lightroom and as you can see there are some clipping details missing in the highlights as shown by the red colours in the sky, in the bright parts of the sky. So I'm going to address that first by turning down the highlights in Lightroom. So I'll just turn that right down to -100. I would also like some detail to show in the blackness of the shed. There is some texture of the wood grain in there, which is impossible to see at the moment. I could turn up the shadows, and you can see the details in the shed obviously then, but the whole of the foreground, the ground, the grass, the sand, the tracks and everything goes very bright, and I think that kind of destroys the mood a little bit. So what I think I'll do is turn that down again, because I quite like the darkness of the ground as it is, and I'm going to just get the brush tool, the adjustment brush tool, and add a little exposure in with that instead. So I'm going to dial it up to about 0.7 of a stop or thereabouts, and then I'm going to use the adjustment brush to brush some extra exposure into the shed. The middle section of the brush is where the edges of the brush go to. The outer circle is the feathering, so you do get a slight effect in the outer edge as well, but it's not quite so noticeable. I don't really want to do the roof because that's sort of unnaturally bright compared with the shed if I do that. Okay, so you can see that I have brightened that up a little bit. Once you've laid the brush strokes down, you can alter the exposure afterwards to brighten it or darken it. So you can see as I turn that up, that becomes ridiculously light and unnatural. So I'm going to turn it back down again, maybe to just over 1. I'll probably add a little bit of contrast, maybe a little bit of clarity in there, and that might just, that increases the contrast, and it brings out the light parts, the grain in the shed, whilst not making the whole thing too dark. And I think I might just turn the blacks down again slightly, because I don't want to see obviously where I've been with the brush if possible. I just quite like that texture to show through on the wood. The other thing I'd like to do here is to pull a filter down over the sky, just to darken the sky a little bit at the top, right at the top. So I've chosen the graduated filter, and I'm going to dial in some underexposure on there, and then just pull down a graduated filter, not too far down, just sort of roughly to the top of the shed, and then play around with the exposure to see exactly where I want it. I want to darken that top down a little bit to keep the eye from floating out of the top. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to do in Lightroom for the moment. I'm going to now go into the Nik filters. So I'm going to go Photo, Edit in Color Efex Pro 4. Just edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, and I'm going to say yes to that. Okay, this just takes a few seconds to prepare the file for editing. Okay, so here is the Nik palette opening up. Just maximize that. Okay, so I've got the graduated neutral density filter on here, which I was after. So it's quite nice, easy to work out just how much darkness you want in the sky, and it's got quite a nice graduated feathering effect on that. And then with the lower tonality, you can decide how bright or dark you want the ground to be, and also where that blend happens. So yeah, somewhere around about there. I think that's all I want in that particular one. So I'm going to save that. So that's my my Nik edited image back in Lightroom. What I'd quite like to do is add a little bit of my favourite contrast into here, which is called structure. And for a colour image, you can find that in Viveza 2. Again, it asks me if I want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments, and say yes. So maximize that again, and just then, actually, I'm gonna just, no, well, I'll leave that actually. I was thinking about altering the saturation, but I like the blue, so I'm going to leave that. I'm going to just add a little bit of structure in here, and you can see if you do the side by side or the before and after image in Viveza, you can see how much you're adding to the image. Now 100% is quite tempting, but I think, you know, perhaps it's getting a little bit too crunchy now, so I'm going to turn it back down to, say, around about 50% and click save. Okay, so that's my again, my Viveza edited image in Lightroom. One other thing that I'd like to do in here, click done there, is I'm just going to try turning down the greens a little bit. I think maybe the grass is slightly too green for my taste, I suppose. Sorry, that's a hue. Do beg your pardon. Don't want the hue. We don't want to change the colour. I just want to lower the saturation a little bit. Thought it was looking a bit weird. Okay, so turn down the green a bit and maybe the yellow a bit as well. Just makes the grass look a little bit less bright and summery, and for this kind of picture I want it to look a little bit bleak and wintry. So if I turn down the green and the yellow, that kind of helps just to make the grass look a little bit less healthy. And then I'm going to finish it off, I think, with a little bit of effects and a little bit of darkening the corners. So a little bit of vignetting, not too much. Obviously that, you know, just looks a bit OTT, but maybe just about 5, -5, something like that. Then I might go back up to my basic controls, tweak the exposure just very slightly upwards, maybe plus 0.5. I sometimes think when I've added in the vignetting, because the corners look darker, the whole image looks a bit too dark. So sometimes I just go back and just tweak the exposure just very slightly, not that much. Make sure you're not losing the highlights again, so perhaps just bring down the white slightly. And I think that's about finished. Yeah, so basically, just to recap, I brought down the highlights to capture the details in the sky, the bright parts of the sky. I added a little bit of a neutral density graduate on the sky to just darken the top sort of eighth of the sky or something like that. I took it into Nik CFX Pro, played with the graduated filters again, just because that's a little bit of a different control than the Lightroom one. I balanced that up to my taste. Oh, sorry, yeah, I forgot. In Lightroom, I used the adjustment brush to brighten up the details of the shed a little bit, just so I could see the lighter wood grain effects, as it was very dark on the original. Then after the color effects, I went into Viveza and altered the contrast control called structure, which again is a little bit like clarity, but just slightly different in the way it affects things. And I think I prefer it slightly, but you know, it's a matter of taste. And then back in Lightroom, I just added a slight vignette and altered the exposure gradually. And you know, I could keep on tweaking it, but I think that's probably okay to my tastes at the moment.